All right, Judges 2, let's call this one Gilgal to Bochim. Gilgal meaning literally rolled away, referring to the time in which God rolled away the reproach of Egypt from Israel, meaning Israel had been in servitude to Egypt for years. Israel probably carried all of the baggage that came along with having been slaves. But when God was bringing them into the promised land, he did it with mighty works that were going to make these mighty nations fear this group of former slaves, thus rolling away the reproach of their slavery, transforming them into a nation that he was going to exalt. Understanding that, however, the title is Gilgal to Bochim because he is sending the angel of the Lord from Gilgal, the place where he rolled away their reproach, to Bochim, a place of weeping. And why was Bochim a place of weeping? Well, because he's bringing the bad news that, of course, they compromised and cut corners on clearing the land, and the corners they've cut are going to become problems for them later on, specifically down the road in later generations, because this generation is actually going to be able to turn it around in a way that's very similar to what we saw in the first chapter, where we saw a king by the name of Adonai-Bezek. When his consequences caught up to him, the children of Israel captured him, cut off his thumbs and big toes. That sounds odd, and so we realize that's the same thing he had done to 70 other kings, and he is going to be candid enough to admit it. The thing I'd done to others, God has now done to me. We compared him to a contemporary internet sensation known as the Liver King and said even though the Liver King likewise had a fall from grace, he was able to rebound, at least so far, by simply telling the truth. So we said likewise the children of Israel at this point, even though the angel of the Lord is bringing them bad news, they are likewise going to resist being locked into a prison of their own fiction by acknowledging the truth and turning away from all of the habits that got them into trouble in the first place. Their next generation is not going to do quite as well. However, because the remnant of the nations that linger in the land are going to cause that next generation trouble, but God is not going to leave them in that trouble forever. He is going to send them judges who are going to help them out of their predicament, but they're also going to offer them counsel as to how not to end up back in that same fix all over again. They're going to accept the help, but not the wise counsel. And so they are going to enter this cycle, as we mentioned, of needless suffering. And so it would be bad enough if all they did was ignore good advice. But with each successive stumble, it's going to describe them as getting worse and worse. And as they do, it's going to become a less and less safe place for the judges to function. Because by the time we get to a judge by the name of Gideon, we're going to see that he not only has the trouble of dealing with Israel's external enemies, he is going to have to deal with people who have now become entitled to do whatever they want. And to the degree he is trying to tell them the truth, they are not going to have any tolerance for the truth that does not endorse what they already feel entitled to do or believe. And so Gideon is going to have to risk his own life just to separate them from the fiction that has them struggling in the first place before he can even go and deal with Israel's external enemies. Understanding that one of the things we did not discuss about prisons of our own fiction is the dual way that they keep us locked up. One, the first way is delusion. To the degree we are believing things that are false, we may have the benefit of not having to hear uncomfortable truth, but we're also missing out on that part of the truth that actually provides us with epiphanies as to how life doesn't really have to be quite as tough as it is right now. So delusion has its own baggage. But beyond delusion, we mentioned gaslighting, what Merriam-Webster identified as its word of the year for 2022. And gaslighting typically is the type of delusion that is used to control other people. And so at first thought, it might seem like, wait a minute, if I had to choose, I'd rather be in control of the narrative than under the delusion of the narrative. But understand it like this. In a prison, you got guards and you got prisoners. The prisoners are locked up, but the guards, even though they're in control of the prisoners, are locked up in the same space. And so whether you are an overseer, a guard, or a prisoner, you're all locked in a place of needless suffering. But here's the thing. Prison guards get to go home. However, to the degree you are even in control of the narrative in a gaslit situation, you are stuck expending the energy that it takes to keep a person under a delusion. And so you are likewise locked in a place where at some point it might be worth asking, how much can I reach my true potential so long as I'm expending the energy that's necessary to keep this person locked under this delusion? And the energy that you can use, no matter how good it might feel to keep somebody else in check, is energy that you can't use reaching your own potential. So as we often say, God's best to you as you go forward in him. This time, God willing, neither being a prisoner or an overseer in prisons of our own fiction, locked away in places of needless suffering, otherwise known as a Bochim.